great coaches understand that for me to give my athletes what they need most in a match or a game or a competition, it's about decision making in those moments. So I want to make good adjustments as a coach. But if I'm not paying attention and observing the game or the match, I won't be able to make good decisions. So the best way to make a good decision is to observe. Shut up and watch.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Wade Gilbert. Dr. Gilbert is an internationally renowned coaching consultant and award-winning professor. He's the author of the highly acclaimed book, Coaching Better Every Season, and editor emeritus of the International Sport Coaching Journal. In addition to serving as a consultant to many college and high school coaches, Gilbert is a longtime advisor to the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, Coach Education Department. He is the lead author of the USOPC Quality Coaching Framework and primary coach education consultant for USA Football. Dr. Gilbert has counseled coaches and sport organizations around the world, spanning all competitive levels, and in every sport imaginable, including world-leading teams such as Hockey Canada, England Rugby, US Soccer, USA Water Polo, US Ski and Snowboard, and Cricket Australia. He also served as the mental performance coach for the Team Canada softball team at the Tokyo 2022 Olympics, helping the team win the program's first Olympic medal ever. In part 2 of this conversation, we dive into goal-setting strategies, in-game coaching keys, and giving them space to play. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. And we're also excited to announce that we're now offering word-for-word transcripts of the podcast episodes. If you'd like to get access to the transcripts on a weekly basis, you can go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast to sign up to become a monthly supporter of the podcast. Supporting the podcast will get you access to the transcripts and other exclusive benefits like a podcast supporter group chat. I'd like to give a special shout out to some of the coaches that have already become podcast supporters. Coach Turner, Coach Hill, Coach Grehan, Coach Nielsen, Coach Armand, Coach Jefferson, and Coach Conifrey. Thanks for your support, and I'm grateful that you found the podcast valuable to your coaching. You can go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast to get the free notes or sign up to support the podcast and receive transcripts and more. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Wade Gilbert. Enjoy the episode.
I want to shift a little bit and talk about something that honestly is, it's mainly selfish because I'm really curious about how to do it well. I haven't done it really much at all in my coaching thus far, but you write quite a bit about it in your book, and that's goal setting. One of the things I have done with goal setting as a part of one of the staffs I've been on is what I at least in basketball, I think it's fairly common, right? Where you maybe have some team goals for the game, or in football, you'll see teams do this where, we want to have, 10 or fewer turnovers, and we want to have X amount of whatever. And then it's almost like this checklist that you can go through after games, after you've started the game with your teams. Done some of that. So might want to talk a little bit about that, but really I'm curious about your thoughts on individual goals within team sports. Like, what are effective ways to set individual goals with athletes within a team sport environment? And maybe even before that, like, why should you do that? Why is it important?
Yeah, goal setting plays a big role in motivation and also in assessment. So, kids get report cards, weekly report cards. Parents can go on and check their students' progress in everything but sport. So that's one of the main curriculum areas. Many kids are involved in that. I can go on anytime and I can get see my kids' math grade and what they turned in, what they haven't turned in, where they stand in different things. But on his water polo team, how do I know how he's doing? Unless I go and talk to the coach, I guess, or make a determination based on what I see in a game. So I think it's a big area that we kind of overlook as coaches. I mean, at the pro level, obviously, in Olympic and college level, that they invest a lot in that. But at club or youth level, school level, regularly monitoring. So it's one thing to set goals, but regularly monitoring the goals. So there's progress reports that is helpful for the parent, for you, for the kid. And it also eliminates a lot of issues when it's just subjective and my opinion versus your opinion. Oh, here's the data. So what kind of goals might you want to set? For sure, I think it's important to have, team goals and individual goals like you're talking about. But you can think about outcome goals, or performance goals or process goals. So outcome might be a certain number of wins, or a certain number of goals or assists or points per game or things like that. But the process goals are important too. Like, how are we going to train and perform, like in terms of work ethic, attitude, connect back to your goals should be connected back to your values, your team values, your core values, and your standards and your expectation. So the goals give you a way to determine how well we're living up to our values and our expectations, not just how many points per game we're scoring or allowing, right? So the traditional statistics, great, but you also need to have goals, or you should have goals that give you some sense of feedback and progress on how well we're living up to our values and our standards on this team. Individual goals within team goals, when you're asking people to set individual goals, it's important in a team setting, it's important for you to ask them, or in writing when they're doing a goal card or something, identify goals, personal goals or individual goals, that if you achieve will help us reach our team goal. So by whatever you write down there, if you're able to do those things, how is that going to help us move closer to achieving our team goal? So your individual goals are important, because for us to succeed, if you're doing well, then we're doing well, hopefully, right? If your goals match up with our team goal. So if you're a defensive oriented type of team, or for example, if you're not necessarily, depending on the makeup of your team and your coaching strategy, if that kid has a lot of goals for, 3-point shots, let's say, or, how many 3-point attempts they're going to get in a game or make, but that's not really part of your offensive strategy based on the makeup of your team this year, maybe, then that goal is not lined up with our team goals. That's a selfish goal. That's something you want, but it's not really consistent with our style of play and how we're going to try and play this year. So that's where I think it's a conversation. It's part of preseason is the time to do that. You first work on your team goals, because everything needs to be situated within our team goals. It's about us, right? So you set those team goals, you agree upon those team goals, then you go to, all right, personal goals, individual goals. And always, as you're writing these down, think about how they align with our team goals. If you're achieving these things, are they going to be consistent with what we're trying to do as a team? How are they going to help us move closer to reaching our team goal?
That's really helpful insight for me, just in terms of, with those individual goals, make that connection really clear. How does this, like you said, serve our team goal or help us arrive at what we want to do together? There's a couple things I want to follow up on in what you talked about. The first one is around having process goals that are connected to our values. Would you maybe share a couple examples of what those might be like, and how do you measure that?
So if we're going to have, teamwork is one of our values. being a good teammate is a value, let's say. So what are some goals that we can individually set that will help us become a better teammate? Could be a goal for I'm going to make have a conversation with at least 2 different teammates about something other than basketball this week or on a weekly basis. Or I'm going to make a point of doing something outside of basketball with at least one different teammate each week. I'm going to make a point of having lunch at school with a different teammate each week. So there's things that you can, real behaviors that you can help them understand that when you do these things, they help us become a better team. And we can measure them. So if it's having lunch with a different teammate once a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe you don't have to measure it every week, but or even monthly. Okay, let's take evaluation. How do we do on this goal here of having lunch with different teammates or something, whatever it might be. But ideally, you don't want to. I mean, those are little things you can check in pretty regularly with, where you just kind of informally checking in with kids. Hey, who did you have lunch with this week? Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, all right. So who are you going to do it with next week? Let's identify it right now. I'm going to check back with you next Friday.
Yeah, that's good. That's a great example and very practical. And yeah, there's other ideas, in my head going off now around, okay, if you have a value of, selflessness or unselfishness, how can we connect to some selfless behavior, maybe just even outside of sport, where did
Yeah,
you serve someone in the last week?
yeah.
Or maybe it's, um, that players have opportunities to go serve in different areas on their own, or maybe as a team, or they go, with a partner or something, depending on your level and context. It always changes. But yeah, I think that's really important for us to consider. Okay, what are some goals that really connect to
And think about
behaviors and
this.
our
Remember
values?
this. Yeah, better people make better players. There's a million variations of that statement, but for the coach who says, the service stuff, and we don't got time for all this team building stuff, and what's that have to do with basketball? Trust me, better people make better players. So if they're and the other thing is what gets measured matters. So if I'm not checking in and we're not measuring these things and keeping a record of these things, it's just a hope. And I hope they do this. Hey, you guys should be doing this. It's like when I teach a class, the kid puts up their hand and says, "Oh, hey, Dr. Gilbert, is this going to be on the test?" Basically, they're saying, do I need to pay attention? Does it matter? Because if it's not measured, it doesn't matter. So if these values are important to you and you believe they're going to make you a stronger team, you got to measure them. And if you don't have goals and targets and behaviors for that, what are you going to measure?
Yeah, that's so true, so powerful. Better people make better players. If you don't measure it, it doesn't matter. Actually, the thing that was jotted in my mind as you were talking about that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not, is the Salisbury University baseball program in Salisbury, Maryland. They're a D3 baseball powerhouse. I think they've made something like 28 or 29 straight College World Series in their level. And their associate head coach, he's professor and coach there. He's a professor in their education college, and then he's the associate head coach. His name's Ron Sires Jr. And have gotten to have some
Mhm.
conversations with him that have been fantastic, and just about how they do things and how they operationalize their core values. And one of their core values is service or selflessness, one of those things. And he's talked multiple times about every single week without fail. A group of guys from their team goes to a food pantry and preps, cooks, cleans a meal for homeless people in their community. And it's become so impactful to those athletes and the program that two things. One, other teams at the university have started to do it because they're like, what are you guys doing that's different? And then two, when alumni come back in town for games, they reach out to the coach and like, hey, can I go serve with you guys on Friday morning? And I think it just that was just jogged in my mind as you were talking about that. Like it matters. It matters. Better people make better players. And if we're going to espouse these values, then we actually have to do some things to show it. Because if not, it's just fluff. It's just words.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. Last thing on goals that I want to talk about. Monitoring goals and monitoring progress. You talked about it kind of on the process side of goals connect to our values. And I like those ideas. Really some self-assessments, some check-ins. Have you done it? How many times have you done it? I'm curious though, when it comes to performance goals. And so, I mean, maybe this is team and or individual. What are some effective and efficient ways that you have or you've seen coaches monitor and track goal progress? Because I'm sure you've heard it so much from so many coaches, like time, right? Is never have enough time. If something takes more time, obviously coaches are probably less likely to do it, right? We need an efficient system. So are there any ways that you've seen coaches be really effective and efficient at tracking goal progress, team level and or individual level?
Yeah, spread the workload around. So in a game, for example, depending on the sport, the kids who aren't in the game can be keeping stats, and that's the easiest way that I've seen. I mean, you have to teach them how to do that, but then it also keeps them more engaged in the match. It gives them they're more focused. They're developing game sense. So having your athletes actually collect some of the data when they can, I think, is really helpful. I've gotten parents involved. So when I was coaching ice hockey, I wanted to keep track of some things that weren't necessarily going to be made available to me through the traditional statistics that are provided after a game. So, and that always varied. Like if there's something in particular, like passes, number of passes, for example, in the offensive zone or whatever it might be, that I'm really preaching with the kids to be selfless. And then I don't have time to keep track of that in a game. Neither do my assistant coaches or other coaches. So I would go in and talk to some parents and say, hey, I give them a clipboard and the stat sheet and how to record a recording sheet. And I'd go over with them, say, hey, do you mind doing this? And inevitably there'd be some parents say, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. Sure. And it gets them engaged in the game and they're often having fun with it. And honestly, I don't care how accurate the stats are, really. In a situation like that, it's just, it'll be close enough. And it'll give me some data that I can then use. And right after, so I get the clipboard as I'm walking off the ice, into the locker room, and use it right away with the kids. Okay, let's see. We set a target today of 100 passes as a team. Let's see how we did. And the kids love it because they're getting immediate feedback, and you can tie little words to it. Like if we get over 100 passes, we're having a pizza party or whatever it might be, or it could be something simple, right? And so getting two very simple ways, getting kids or your athletes involved in helping to collect the data, getting parents involved in helping to collect the data. Those are two simple ways. Use the existing data, obviously, that you're getting off game reports or film or things like that. So it's not about, to me, it's never about more. Like, let's do more stuff that takes more time. I don't have time to do the stuff I want to do already. So it's more about thinking, how can I, repurpose time, resources, people, so that I can get a little closer to what I would ideally want. So you're never probably going to get exactly what you want, but can I get a little closer? So can I get even some data? And even if it's not really highly accurate data, it's good enough. Like it's gonna move the needle for me. It's gonna help me, make my point and help my athletes get a little bit of feedback that maybe they weren't getting before.
I love that. And again, my mind's racing with some ideas right now too of okay, what are some things that I might have some of my guys track on the bench this year, and some
Sure.
parents that I could enroll in that. I'm even, thinking in my mind like, hey, if you've got a couple parents that they annoy you during the game, ask them to take some stats for you. It'll probably change their focus while they're watching the game
Totally.
too, right? Great strategy there, right? If
Totally.
you have a
Yeah.
distracting parent,
Yes.
like, hey, can you take stats for me? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really good. There's one more topic I want to pick your brain on a little bit before I ask you a few rapid fire questions and get you out of here. And it's one you talk about in the book, bench coaching, in-game coaching. I know there's a lot we could talk about, but I would just love if you maybe shared a few things from your experience and your research. What what is effective bench coaching? I mean, you can talk about maybe some of the things that we tend to get wrong, but then how can we do a better job of in-game coaching?
There is some research on that. And a lot of people generally feel that in a game or a match situation, I need to play the role of a coach. So coaches coach, right? But in fact, what we see is the best coaches get out of the way and they coach less, in a sense, in matches and games. And there was a neat study with soccer coaches, and there was the more successful coaches had less verbal interactions, so they spoke less in a game compared to the less successful coaches. So we sometimes use that term, the puppet master, and this is what we see on TV. What you see on ESPN, it's what you see in college games, coach running up and down the floor at a basketball game, basically operating the players, yelling and screaming. And that's not what great coaches generally do. And I think you see that more when people are starting as a coach because they feel like I have to show people I'm coaching. I know what I'm doing. And if I'm just sitting there watching, it looks like I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing my job. And especially parents who don't know any better, if the team's not performing well, he just watches. He doesn't even yell at them. But great coaches understand that for me to give my athletes what they need most in a match or a game or a competition, it's about decision making in those moments. So I want to make good adjustments as a coach. But if I'm not paying attention and observing the game or the match, I won't be able to make good decisions. So the best way to make a good decision is to observe, shut up and watch, and take notes. And you'll notice most of the great coaches watch an NHL game, watch a college football game, whatever. They'll have a notepad, a clipboard. They'll have something with them where they're taking notes. They're watching the game. They're taking notes. They're not yelling every time a thought pops into their head. They're watching. They're taking notes. They're collecting data. And yes, they're intervening, but they're going to observe more. And then when there's a timeout, a stoppage and play, whatever it might be, or an opportunity to talk to an athlete, they'll have had time to kind of reflect on that initial thought that popped into their head instead of just spitting it out. So a simple strategy that I recommend all coaches use, think of every sport's different, but set a goal for yourself as a coach. Like if you're coaching basketball, I'm going to take the first 5 minutes just to watch, or 4 minutes. First 4 minutes, I'm not going to yell anything or change. I'm just going to watch and maybe take notes. I'm just going to watch. Or the first quarter even, I'm just going to watch. And you'll be surprised at how hard it is to just shut up and watch and get out of the way. And my experience, you're more likely to make mistakes and pull your team out of their performance zone by trying to coach them in a match versus just let them play. Like if you do your job in training, your job in a match is to let them do what you've trained them to do. And yes, there's going to be moments where you need to nudge and shape and encourage and reinforce and make strategic decisions for sure. But I'll give you a real example of this. I have a friend who played quarterback at Nebraska football a long time ago when Tom Osborne was the coach there, and they were the number one team in the nation for many years. And then we were having this conversation. He said, "Yeah, now that you mention it, we often forgot he was even there in the game." And this guy's regarded as one of the best coaches of all time, right? And I hear that over and over at Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich. You look at different sports, you start to watch these great coaches, and they're John Wooden was a classic example. Phil Jackson, classic example. They really felt like my job was to prepare them for the game and then get out of the way.
That's so good. That's really good. And one of the big reasons that I'm coaching and doing what I'm doing now is because my high school soccer and basketball coach, Coach Jug, had a big impact on my life. And it's funny now, knowing what I know and my experience, reflecting on what he did. I didn't understand it at the time, but that was him too. He was observing so much that even in practice, man, there'd be times where he wouldn't say anything for 10 or 15 minutes while we were playing. He's just watching. And yeah, I think there's so much power in that. Just getting out of the way. Right? It doesn't mean that we don't coach and we don't make interventions. We do, but they're thoughtful, they're intentional. Like you said, there's some data behind it. There's some things we've really observed for, and yeah, I think it can be hard. Like you said too, is that's not the stereotype, and so it takes some internal security from us to be willing to do it differently, even knowing that people may think that I don't do anything doing this, but I know that this is more effective or what's best for my athletes. And so, yeah, I love what you shared there. Before we wrap it up, Dr. Gilbert, let me throw 3 rapid fire questions to you. We'd just love to know the first thing that comes into your head from your coaching experience. The most fun part of coaching is
well, thinking about ice hockey, locker room, just seeing how kids interact with their teammates and the fun that they have, especially when they kind of have their own space. So, yeah, kind of watching them on a team bus or in a locker room or at a team dinner, that to me is really rewarding.
That's good. I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
This idea of getting out of the way and giving them more space to do the things you've trained them to do.
That's really good. And last one, I know I'm successful as a coach when
a kid comes back the next year.
That's good.
To me, that's the greatest measure of success, any sport, any level, really. Because if the kid wants to sign up again next year and wants to play baseball next year, I did my job.
Yeah.
And honestly, winning's great. Everybody wants to win. That's a given. So, but there's so many variables, especially when you're coaching kids, that go into, winning and losing. You could do everything right, and kids are kids. I had a fight with their friend at school today. I had an argument with mom or dad last night. Head's not in the game.
Yeah.
It'll make you a bad coach when you end up losing the game? No. I would never hang my hat as a youth coach on win-loss records. But the win is how many of those kids came back next year and signed up to play again next year. That's the win.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, Dr. Gilbert, this has been fantastic. Before we hop off, just share with the listeners where they can connect with you, get your book, or anything else you want to share with them.
Sure. The book, Coaching Better Every Season, is available anywhere books are sold pretty much and online. And then in terms of getting a hold of me, you can either email me if you'd like to. You could look me up at Fresno State, Dr. Wade Gilbert at Fresno State, and be happy to chat. Or on Twitter, I do have an account there. I haven't been as active on it lately as I probably should be, but there's a lot of good material on social media, and I try to retweet things once in a while. But that would be another avenue to maybe stay in touch.
Fantastic. Dr. Gilbert, thank you for your time and your work and for sharing with coaches.
No, thank you, Luke, and the kids are lucky to have you, and it sounds like you're doing a great job.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks to Dr. Gilbert for joining me. You can find links to connect with him and get his book in the show details. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. You can also find a link to sign up to support the show if you're interested in receiving transcripts and other exclusive benefits. Thanks for listening to the podcast, and have a happy new year.